Hello and welcome to another training video. Now today we're going to be taking a look at the difference between a couple of Power Query methods, and one is appending two tables together and the other is merging. And the reason we're going to do this is we're going to see which one is quicker. So I've got a scenario here where I have transactions table, and the individual transactions actually don't have a price of the product with this table. So the individual transactions have a code number for the product ID, and what we want to do is we want to get that product price from another table. Now here's where it gets slightly complex, because the other table, which is called my table products, this has multiple instances of the same product ID. Now the reason it has this is because the price has been updated over a period of time, and I've just put in a random update on the price here. Now those who saw my last video would remember that I had a way of doing this, and that was by merging the two together and then doing some shenanigans on them then just to get the price from when the sale was made, so the latest updated price when the sale was made. Now just to quickly run through how I did this, first of all I got the two files joined together or connected with what's called a merge, although here it's called a nested join, and the column that's the same in both is product ID, so that's my product ID. Now because this had 5 different options, 4 or 5 for each one, the result is it returns a table from table products, and that has all of the values in it. Now when I expand that out, what you'll see is that I end up with multiple copies for each one. So here I've got 4 for each row that I had in my data. I've now got 4 rows. So what I then did was a conditional column, and that actually took a look at whether the date of the transaction was before or after the update date. And if the update date was before it, then it gave me a value. If the update date was after, then it gives me a null. So those are the ones I don't want, so I then filter them out. So I filtered out all the nulls, but we see here this is still not perfect, because this one here has all of the updates before it occurred, and I actually only want the last one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort them, and I sort them in opposite order by the date time of the transaction, but also including not the transaction ID, but the product ID, so that they're grouped together within the product. And now I remove the duplicates. Now, not just removing the duplicates from the date time or from the product, I'm removing those where all of these are the same. In other words, it's a duplicate of the same transaction, but with those different prices. Now, the reason I sorted my data earlier is the one that I want is now on top for each of those transactions where I've got 4 or where I've got multiple transactions. Like I said, the one I want to keep is the one that's on top. So removing duplicates keeps the top one and removes any subsequent. So that's perfect. I've then removed the extra columns, and my changing the type, that was just in this last column to put my pack price into currency. So that was my merge solution. However, the other day I was watching a video and I got the idea to do an appending solution. Now this was something that Ken Puls put together, and to be fair, he says he got it from Ox du Soleil. So credit where credit's due, this may be Oz's solution and not mine. Now what we did here was, rather than merging the two tables together, which puts them together side by side, we're joining them one on top of the other. And what we need to do for that is we need to have a common column which is date time. So I took my date time from my table products, and in there it was named as update date. I've made it also called date time, and I then merge the two together. Now what we end up with is we end up with loads of null values. So we'll get a null value wherever there's a transaction, and then over here, for example in the till ID, we'll get a null value when it's not a transaction, in other words when it's an update. So here now I'm just sorting the rows again, and I've just reordered the columns just to make it easier for me to work on, and in fact I could take that step out if I thought it was slowing the process down. I've sorted the rows again because the first one didn't work properly, and again I would take these out if I thought they weren't working properly. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. Let's take that sorted the rows out. And in fact, now we've done it, let's take out that reordered columns as well. So now we've just got the rows sorted, and once we've sorted the rows, what we're going to do is we're going to fill down in the pack price. And the reason we're going to do that is because we now have the value. In other words, this is one which is an update to the price, and this is a transaction. So now wherever we have a null value, the actual correct price for that point in time is the one immediately above. So we just fill down, and then what we're going to do is we're going to filter the rows, and I'm filtering the row where the till ID is null. So I'm taking out all of the nulls in the till ID. And the reason I did that is if there is a till ID, then it is a transaction. If there isn't, then it's not a transaction. And what it actually is an update to the price of a product. Okay, so that was what I had as the two different solutions. And just in order to see which one of these will run quicker, now bearing in mind we've got just, well, nearly 11,000 rows in my transactions for the years that we have, and we've got 23,000 rows of products. So this is a not huge, but it's not insignificant amount of data. Now what I have here is I have a Vba timer which is going to actually time each of these queries, and it just runs through a loop, and it's going to run through 10 times. And what it does is it takes the starting time and the finishing time for refreshing each of these queries, and this is a result. That's not the result in seconds, that's actually 100 times the result, because I've just boosted it up to give me an actual valid number so I can see the differences. And what we then have is we then have a pivot table here, and the pivot table gives a result depending on what happens in the Vba timer. Now I've got a button here that I can click on to refresh this. Now it's going to take probably a minute or so to actually do the refreshing. It takes about 3 seconds to do a refresh on one of these queries, and it's running 10 times. So if I'm doing each of them, and I'm doing each of them 10 times, and that should be around about a minute. And what's going to happen is, at the moment, even when we see these both apparently running at the same time, they're not actually running at the same time, just like now. And the reason they're doing that is because I've got screen updating turned off in my VBA code, and so this is not actually what we're seeing. It's not actually doing it live as we see it. The way we're going to know it's finished is it's actually going to take us to that pivot table sheet, and it's going to then refresh the pivot table and chart, and so we'll be able to see what the difference is in speed between these appending the same sets of data together and merging the same sets of data together. Now the reason I'm running this 10 times is because actually if my machine is doing something else in the background, even something that's a non-displayed item like a running updates or something like that, that actually uses up processor power, so it will distort the results if it happens on one of them and not the other. So if I just run it once, I might get some distortion. If I run it 10 times, the chance of that has been reduced. So what you notice here is it's updated my pivot table, And it looks quite clearly as if the merge comes out ahead. The total time for the merge is significantly less than the time for the append. Now, I would have thought it would be the opposite way around, because the merge actually requires a lookup and some calculations, because I put in a calculated column. And the append, even though that was as clean as I could make it, I took out any erroneous lines of code, that seems to be taking significantly longer than the merge. But that is not the case. What you must do whenever you see something like this is you must reset the value of your bottom line to 0. And when you do that, you can see that actually the difference between these two types of query is insignificant. The first chart showed that there was a massive difference between the two, but it was actually only showing the very, very top of both of these charts and not the whole charts. So there you have it. In the example I gave you, my merge is quicker than my append. However, it's not significant. And to be honest, if you understand one of these better than the other, then frankly that's the one you should use. Or if you find it quicker to write one than the other, then that's the one you should use. A lesson to learn from this is if you do create a pivot table, don't immediately assume things from the chart or the table you see, because it may be showing you simplistic data, which might be a distortion of the actual data. Make sure you look at it to know what it's telling you before you take it for granted. Okay, that's all I have for you. I hope somebody found it useful, and as always, thank you for listening.